I'm really excited to talk about this because, you know, obviously everybody is entitled to their opinion. And this is another, content creator that has an opinion. I think it's important that, his voice is heard just as much as anyone else's. You can agree, you can disagree on those things, but I think it's interesting that we've got more and more people that are creating content around Gears of War, some of which you could say is definitely in a negative way. Others are creating content in a positive way. So it's interesting to see the good along with the bad as well. So with that, let's get into this thing, guys. Terry on the Human, how the Coalition is embarrassing Gears of War.
Franchise is in a very lucky position when it comes to story. Most games that are centered around military themes and have a multiplayer focus have fan bases that really don't give a fuck about the story. Call of Duty, Battlefield, and everything like that, they've all dropped games that have no stories included, and while there were people like me that were kind of bummed out, the majority still bought those kinds of games without blinking an eye. Gears of War, on the other hand, a lot like Halo, is one of those games where the story actually matters to its fan base. Also, a lot like Halo, there are a lot of people who will buy these games and not even touch the multiplayer and just play the story by itself. After Gears 3, Epic Games kind of threw in the towel for the franchise, and one spin-off in the form of Gears of War Judgment was made by a group called People Can Fly, while a new studio was made to take over the franchise under the name of The Coalition. This is actually pretty similar to what would happen to Halo as well, and I don't need to explain what a big responsibility something like that is. And oftentimes when something like this happens, you're bound to get that jaded nostalgia circle jerk crowd that just doesn't like it because it's not the OG games. They'll stomp their feet, pout, and all that other corny shit because they made no attempts to like anything about the new game at all. No attempt is ever made to like any of the new characters, stories, ideas, or anything at all. They just cup their hands over their ears and say it's all trash because it's not like, the old shit. I'm sure when it comes to discussions on long-running franchises like this, you're all used to that sort of mentality. So I'm going to give you a different one. You're going to get a perspective from someone like me that actually got into the Gears of War franchise because he was interested in 4, I enjoyed 4, and I gave this new team a fair shot and had it backfire in my fucking face when the train wreck that was Gears of War 5 came out and left a permanent stain on this franchise that cannot be erased or scrubbed away no matter how fucking hard we want it to be. The original trilogy isn't really the focus of this video, but I will reference it when it becomes necessary.
Okay, so let's talk first and foremost, guys and girls, about, what he's saying here in the very beginning. First of all, the train wreck that was Gears 5, I totally disagree that it was a train wreck. Number one, it was, a very good selling title for Microsoft and Xbox. Best-selling title for Xbox Game Pass, when of course it came out. Now Game Pass had come out pretty shortly before Gears 5 came out, but it sold very well. So that's the first thing. Number two is the game, every single Gears of War title up to this point has had very shaky launches. That is without question. Gears 5 is no different. It had a shaky launch for sure. It's the decisions that were made afterwards, which is where you start kind of seeing how, maybe if we would have gone in a little bit of a different direction, it may have been better, that being like the Coalition. But I put just as much blame, and I've said this multiple times, I put just as much blame on the community as the Coalition for the failure, quote unquote failure, of Gears 5. Here's why. Gears 5, being the game that it was, even though I felt like, sure, you could say it was a step in the wrong direction, but to say that it was a terrible title, is, I think like it's just a disservice to even say that about this title, even though I didn't necessarily like the entire direction that they went in. from a campaign perspective to, a multitude of different perspectives, but I still thought that it was a solid entry in the Gears of War franchise. I think that the backlash from the community to the Coalition was one that, obviously in my mind was unwarranted. I think that, it's not necessarily that the Coalition didn't deserve any blame for anything, but I think that when you're talking a niche community like the Gears of War community, and you're talking a community that, is still trying to grow and find its ground, I think it's really important that it's all about how you say things to anybody in life, but especially like, if you love a franchise, it's about the way that you talk to the development team. Because if I was working at the Coalition and the backlash that came from Gears 5, or really any Gears of War title for that matter, there was always negatives, there were positives, but the negatives a lot of times, when you have a lot of those, it feels like it's the entire community, because the community is a niche community. And so if I'm working at the Coalition, my personality, I would want to prove everyone wrong. So I would keep on, I would push as hard as I could in order to get the game in the right state where everybody enjoyed it. And I would want to prove all the doubters and haters wrong. But that's not everybody. There's people at the Coalition, when they hear this backlash, probably didn't want to work at the Coalition anymore. Kind of wanted to crawl into a hole and die, essentially. I think that to say that Gears 5 has just been a train wreck, it didn't, it started off tough with the launch. The game had so much promise, though, even though the campaign had things that weren't that great. The multiplayer had some things that, were shaky about it. But that's any AAA title, guys. There's going to be issues along the journey. It's how you address those issues. And so I put just as much blame on the community as I do the Coalition for, like I said, the failure of Gears 5, even though I look at it as it wasn't a failure, because it was a very good selling game, the best selling game on Xbox Game Pass. There was just a number of things that between community and Coalition, we just weren't on the same page.
Also, yes, this is one of those spoiler types of videos, so this is your only warning. But trust me, with how shit Gears 5's writing is, you're not missing much. I'm doing you a favor if you haven't played it yet. So Gears of War 4 starts us right in the action with a prologue where we play sections of the events leading up to now. From the Pendulum Wars to the Locust Emergence Day, all the way to the end of the Locust War. It's pretty cool to see Dom in command of his own squad in these sections, as well as some familiar commanders and faces from games past. Dom was always kind of the player too. He didn't really get to command his own sort of, underling, so it's really nice to see that. If you've played Gears games before, you'll notice how much smoother combat feels now in comparison. Combat was fine in Gears before, but it could be a little janky. Let's keep it 100. You'd end up in awkward situations sometimes where you and an enemy would be on opposite sides of cover, just kind of awkwardly blind firing at one another. And you could try to vault over and stun them, but it was a bit finicky and not ideal if there were more enemies behind him. In Gears 4, though, a grab has been added where you can pull someone from over cover, and it can lead to an instant kill. You'll also start to notice, story-wise, that the COG has had a bit of a leadership change. Some chick named Jin. You know the drill by now. Stock standard motivational speeches with a side of serving, corrupt, and hard-handed dictatorship. Right around here, we're introduced to the new gang. We have JD, Marcus and Anya's son, Kate, daughter of the leader of the Outsiders, a local group that resist COG rule and live on their own terms, Del, JD's best friend since childhood, and Oscar, Kate's drunk and overprotective uncle.
So, okay. One of the things, and I feel like a lot of people talk about the characters in a kind of negative light, in terms of, JD, Kate Diaz, Del. I mean, pretty much all the new characters, a lot of people just don't like anymore, or they didn't like them from the very beginning. And I think that we have to give some of these characters some time to develop. Now, what I will say about that is that the Coalition should have given JD more time to develop from Gears of War 4 to Gears 5. They should have allowed us to play as JD or we should have been playing JD in Gears 5. I feel like you needed a couple of games in order to really start to connect with him as a character, because when you're moving from one of the greatest characters in video game history, in my opinion, that being Marcus Phoenix, you play as him in 3 games, and then obviously that transitions over to, playing Baird in Gears Judgment. And then, of course, when we get to Gears of War 4, there's a lot of living up to do. And I felt like Gears of War 4 did a great job with this, kind of, passing the torch, so to speak, from Marcus Phoenix to his son JD. It made so much sense to me. But then one game later, they give the torch from JD to Kate Diaz. Don't get me wrong, Kate Diaz is an awesome character, but I feel like JD should have been given more time to develop, and instead they made JD, being the Coalition, made him seem like, some kind of douchebag in Gears 5. And I just didn't like the character arc that they took him. And then at the end of Gears 5, you are given the choice whether to kill JD or Dell. It just didn't make any sense. It was almost like everything that led up to that moment from Gears 4 to Gears 5, it didn't really matter, because JD was just going to be, he was going to be up for possibly being killed off. We don't know what's going to be canon in Gear 6, but nonetheless, I just feel like they needed to give these characters more time to develop.
Exactly what you would expect out of a son of Marcus and Anya. He's got Marcus's skills and leadership, but his mother's optimism and quick thinking, often coming up with ideas to get everyone out of sticky situations. Dell is the comic relief character, always cracking jokes and lightening the mood. And Kate is the tough girl, bad attitude type of character. Takes no shit, moody, easy to set off, and always trying to fucking argue. We've all dated one. Now, I've watched videos from other people, and I've heard people say that they don't like these characters or this new direction for Gears because it's too campy and lighthearted like the MCU, as if that's somehow a bad or negative thing. Typical Reddit lords who want to be intellectuals, so they think they're too smart or cool to enjoy anything with some fucking humor in it. It's cool to dislike the MCU on the internet nowadays, so everybody wants to fit in and feel like their taste is refined. As you can probably tell, I disagree with said opinion. Guys, we've already had our trilogy with the rough and tough, serious Marcus and Dom. Like, long before we even met Dom and Marcus, they had been through some rough shit, dude. This new band of heroes, they're young adults who've grown up after the war and conflict is already mostly over. And it makes sense when you think about it, because they're basically like college kids. See, with long franchises like this, people often compare new and old characters in the wrong way. Especially if characters have been in multiple games, people will often go, oh, well, I don't feel attached to these new characters. Yeah, but you had like several fucking games to get attached to the old characters, so you can't compare an entire franchise to one new game in a saga.
Look, I totally agree with him on this. Like, I kind of already talked about this, but I really do agree that we as the community have not given these new characters much time to develop. Now, the Coalition hasn't really helped much with that, moving from, JD to Kate Diaz from one game to the next. I think that's a problem for sure. But I still feel like, even with that being said, we haven't given them enough time. And I know I reminisce about the past as well, that being, Marcus. I mean, just the old gang, right? I mean, just what they did from Gears of War 1 to Gears 2, eclipsing what they were able to do in from Gears 1 to Gears 2. And then even like eclipse that, which everyone thought was impossible, going from Gears 2 to Gears 3. Unbelievable what they were able to pull off, that being Epic Games. And it was like this culmination of this unbelievable trilogy, like in my mind, the greatest trilogy ever made in gaming. And then obviously we got, Gears of War Judgment, which is kind of like that title that at least myself want to forget about, because I believe it led us into the dark ages of Gears of War. But those 3 games, I mean, sure, you can't take anything away from them. I mean, they were amazing. But yes, for the new age, for right here, right now, you got to move on. You got to learn to adapt and evolve as a franchise. And I think the Coalition did a really good job of this in Gears of War 4. Gears 5, when they started changing some things up, it did cause some issues from a canon perspective to just a campaign perspective, just in general. But I got to tell you, I really think we need to give these characters a little bit more of a chance to appreciate and really fall in love with, essentially.
Gears of War, because I mean, let's be honest, as much as we love Gears 1, who actually had a personality in that game outside of like Cole and Baird? That was it. I gotta tell you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear. And what you need to hear is that they were really just walking boulders. Marcus was tough guy number 1. Dom was tough guy number 2. Dom didn't even get fleshed out until Gears 2, when we start to learn that he had lost his wife. And most of what we even knew about Marcus was pretty vague up until Gears 3. They kept dropping hints, but they were not fleshed out until Gears 3. Let's be honest here. You just cannot expect a trilogy of character development to compare to one game. And trying to do so is where you're shooting yourself in the foot. You have to give new characters multiple games to get to know them. Anyway, JD and gang are here at an abandoned settlement to steal a fabricator. I usually don't pay attention to technobabble, but from what I understand, it's some kind of future tech 3D printer that makes shit. JD and Dell are ex-COG soldiers, which is the only reason they know about this. Throughout most of this act, you'll hear references to some event called Settlement 2 that was the driving reason for them leaving. Now, for better or for worse, this will be more fleshed out in the next game. But for now, what the player knows is that Settlement 2 was a falling out between the Outsiders and the COG that resulted in the COG firing on the Outsiders during their riots and protests. This event made JD and Dell question the COGs and their leadership, and led to Dell convincing JD to leave the COG with him. A wind flare forces them to take shelter in the settlement ahead of schedule. These are a new addition to certain combat arenas that will change and damage the environment, throw off your grenades, break cover, and things like that to shake up combat a bit. I like them. Eventually, though, they get the fabricator and end up face to robot with Jin, who accuses them of stealing her citizens and soldiers, which is our first clue to the fact that the Locust might be back and something is going on. Throughout these chapters, you'll also notice little unexplained events like doors opening that they didn't open, or carts magically arriving to, rescue them from trouble that they never called for. We later find out that this is Baird, who's been keeping tabs on them ever since they left the COG to make sure they're staying out of trouble and that they're safe.
Okay, so I want to talk about this really quick. By the way, Xenolium, I appreciate you for the follow. Thank you so much. One of the things that I want to talk about here is, one of the things I didn't like about Gears of War 4 was the emphasis on the robots. It felt like a little bit at times we were going away from the Locust Horde, which is what Gears of War was all about. And they were really had this heavy emphasis on the robots. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Like necessarily, I get the Coalition wanted to have their own kind of twist to the Gears of War title and franchise as a whole. They definitely wanted to go in their own direction, away from what Epic Games started. And so I totally understand that. One of my biggest issues with Gears of War 4 was the emphasis on the robots. I think that it kind of just took away some of the horror elements of Gears of War, that gritty feel. But then, of course, on the flip side of that, they did introduce some new, characters to the Locust Horde that did kind of build some intensity and such in Gears of War 4. But I think that was the toughest part for me, at least from a campaign perspective, was definitely fighting those robots quite a bit.
If I'm honest, this act and the next one as well are kind of slow opening to really get to what Gears of War is about. The majority of these acts, you'll be fighting these things called DBs. These are new COG robots invented by Baird to help with the wars without having to spare human soldiers. Now, they can be programmed to use non-lethal shock rounds, but as we'll later find out, this is a very rare occurrence. Jin typically has no problem ordering these DBs to just fire on civilians with live ammunition. If they get too close to, COG property, or they're acting out of line and whatnot, Jin does not care. We don't really start fighting any Locust or Swarm or anything like that until about Act 3. In the meantime, we can get a good feel for the new weapons. They're mostly futuristic takes on weapons we already know. The Enforcer is like a faster firing Lancer. The Overkill is like a faster full auto Gnasher. And the M-Bar is a hold to charge sniper rifle. One thing that's weird about this game, if my memory serves me right, is that only the Enforcer can be refilled at ammo blocks. I have no fucking idea why they did this, but it doesn't work, so it's good they remove it in the next game. Back at the Outsider camp, we get introduced to Reyna, Kate's mother, leader of the Outsiders, and the only authority figure she will ever listen to for the next 2 fucking games.
So, okay, I want to leave it at this. Because he's kind of, Terry on the Human, you guys should definitely check out the entire video. But he goes into like the backstory about Gears of War 4. Then he gets to Gears 5, talks about Gears 5 and how the Coalition is embarrassing Gears of War with Gears 5. And I said it earlier, but the Coalition to me is not embarrassing Gears of War at all, really, in my opinion, because I feel it very contradictory when you say, let's just say, for example, that the characters are good, right? And the new characters, like the new characters are really good, but on the flip side of that, some of the actions that the Coalition have made have like embarrassed Gears of War. To me, at least, number one, the Coalition are first and foremost responsible for Gears of War getting out of a limbo state or a state of no return, which Microsoft, of course, created this team in order to bring Gears of War back. So without the Coalition, Gears of War would really, I should say Microsoft, without Microsoft purchasing the rights, we may never have gotten another Gears of War title because of the disaster that was Gears of War Judgment, not the disaster that was Gears 5. But that being said, I think the Coalition not only being responsible for bringing back Gears of War essentially from the dead, or the dark ages of Gears of War is what I always call it, they gave us Gears of War 4, which I thought was a great stepping stone. I mean, you could really start by saying Ultimate Edition to start. Then you get Gears of War 4. I thought that was a great stepping stone. Gears 5, there were ways that it went into, the wrong direction, right? But I also thought on the flip side of that, the Coalition really tried to innovate in a major way. That being like, for example, having a semi-open world. I thought that was awesome. They're bringing, escape mode into the fray. They kind of added a number of different things. Now, sure, there are things that the Coalition did not do right, but that's really with any AAA title, like I said earlier. Any AAA title that comes out, there's going to be pros and cons. There's going to be things that some people agree with, some things that people disagree with. And the Coalition, I'm sure would have done some things differently when Gears 5 first came out. I think the biggest issue, though, was that they moved away from JD Phoenix so quickly to Kate Diaz from a campaign perspective. We should have given JD more time to develop, and instead they really turned his character kind of against us as the audience. And Kate Diaz, even though I like her a lot as a character, I would have preferred to continue playing as JD and let him develop some more. And then maybe after another game or two, we could have passed the torch to Kate Diaz, and it could have been, something pretty interesting to see what happens from there. But I don't think that the Coalition, lastly, what I'll say about them embarrassing Gears of War, they are right now in the lab creating Gears of War 6 or Gear 6, whatever we want to call it, amongst other Gears of War projects. Who knows what those are? We're going to be talking about those here shortly on the show. But without the Coalition, we wouldn't be getting another entry in the Gears of War franchise. We might. It would probably be a different, development studio, things of that nature. But they brought Gears back from the dead. And now with Gears 6, they're taking their time and they're doing it right. This is the longest stretch of time that we've had to wait for another Gears of War title. The Coalition knows, and Microsoft knows, that there's things that they did right, there's things that they've done wrong, and there's things they got to do better moving forward. And I'm going to challenge everybody in the community to do the same. That being realizing what we've done right, what we've done wrong, and what we can do better moving forward in terms of communication with the Coalition. Guys, there's a certain way that you can say things. Backlash and things of that nature is one thing, but when, it's really all in how you say it, essentially. Because a community like ours in Gears of War is not as large as a community like in Call of Duty. If, Infinity Ward or Treyarch hears a bunch of backlash about something from Call of Duty, it kind of goes in one ear out the other because the community is so large. But when there's a number of people from the Gears community complaining or going at the Coalition about things, it's a big deal because that's a big portion of the community because it's not as big of a title. Obviously it being, Xbox exclusive, so on and so forth. But I think that I would make the argument that the Coalition's not embarrassing Gears of War. They are taking the things that they've done right, the things that they have done wrong, and the things that they can do better, and they're going to apply those things moving forward. Now, I may be totally wrong about this, but I've said it on the YouTube channel. You guys can check out all the Gears of War content, new Gears of War content every single day on the YouTube channel. But I believe that there is a huge possibility, and I'm going to say this, but you're going to have to take it with a pinch of salt, because Gears of War 3 was my favorite Gears of War title of all time. It's my favorite game of all time. And then on top of that, Gears of War 2 was, it's definitely up there as well. It's kind of part 1, part 2, in my opinion, or number 1, number 2, and it's very, very close, being Gears of War 3 and Gears 2. But I think that Gears 6, with this long period of time, I think that the Coalition are cooking up something that could be incredible. Not only could it be the best Gears of War title that the Coalition has ever made up to this point, it could challenge Gears of War 2 and Gears of War 3 as best ever. Now, that's a big statement, but I think that there's a real possibility for this because of that extra time that Microsoft is allowing the Coalition to really work on those little things. Moving to Unreal Engine 5, that's a huge deal as well. So when you look at all of those things, I have a lot of hope and a lot of belief that this next one is going to be awesome. But in conclusion to this segment, I believe that the Coalition are actually, on pace to take Gears of War to potential new heights, not embarrassing the franchise. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about this in the comment section down below. You guys can check out the entire video of Terry on the Human, his entire video, in the description down below. And I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts about this. Like I said, in the comment section, let's have a real conversation about it. And for more Gears of War content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.